Shining, shining like a diamond. I see people watching. Perfect, hourglass timing. Good things come to those who wait. Silhouette looking cinematic. Yeah, I bet you wish you had this. Bless me, I'm sicker than your average. So contagious.
Welcome. I'm so glad you are joining me on my 7-day Facebook Live challenge. I got that out of the way. Today, I am Lilyvette Rodriguez with Align by Design. And today we are going to be interviewing Irené Turtle with Turtle Executive Coaching. But before we bring her on, if you have a chance, please go to my Facebook page and like so that we can organically grow. So that's my commercial. Anyway, I'm so excited to be able to have these next few minutes with Irené. Irené, let's bring her on. So Irené, thank you. I mean, it just means so much to me that you've been able to adjust your schedule to be able to be here with us today. There's so much that I want to cover during this time. So why don't we start off by you sharing with those who are either seeing live or if they're watching the replay, who you are.
Well, thank you, Lily, for having me. This is very exciting. I love your new hairdo, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, I work with executives and I help them build their leadership skills. I also work with teams because these days, even more now in our virtual world, teams are being much more impactful. So I work with the teams to help them be more than the sum of their parts, help them address all the needs of their stakeholders and help them be high value and high performing. So those are some of the things that I do, the things that I'm really passionate about.
Okay. So do you specialize in a particular field or, because you're saying executives and you in their leadership skills, but there's so many different industries. Is there a particular industry that you like to work with?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, Lily. I work a lot with tech companies and technology-based companies. So that could be engineers, it could be doctors or lawyers. It tends to be people, regardless of the industry, Lily, who have worked a lot on their technical skills, whether that's finance, engineering, software, legal, or whatever, and haven't always given as much attention to their leadership skills, their interpersonal skills, maybe their communication skills. And and I know, and most of us know that the more senior you become in your role, the technical skills become less important. And what becomes much more pressing and more urgent is our ability to lead a team, to communicate, to build connections with our stakeholders, whether you're a company of 10 or a company of 10,000.
So, have you always been in this industry? What attracted you to do this type of work?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been in the corporate world most of my career, and I've worked at Disney, I've worked at Ernst & Young Consulting, I've worked at some big companies like that, and I've worked at startups, and I worked for an incubator for a while, and a lot of other companies in between. And the common denominator, as I always saw it, was the quality of the leadership. Because let's face it, people don't leave the company, they don't leave the job, they leave their boss. So if you have a good leader, the impact of that, not only on the people, and let's face it, the biggest asset everybody has is their people. If you're not taking care of them, they're going to leave and go somewhere else. So the benefits might be great, the commute might be great, but if you have a boss who doesn't treat you well, doesn't help develop you, then you're going to go and move somewhere else. So I was always fascinated by why one leader, no matter how brilliant they were, how high their IQ were, why they were able to keep people, retain people, keep people happy. People would follow them to the end of the earth and follow them from job to job as well. And other people, nobody wanted to work for them. People were out the door in droves. So that's always fascinated me. Human behavior has always fascinated me.
So what form does that look like? Because I know that you are a very big advocate of assessments. You've even quantified yourself as saying it's like, I just would love to take another assessment just so that you can see the results. So, share with us a little bit about that, how assessments, especially now in the workplace, can be a very beneficial tool to have.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, as much as I am a bit of an assessment junkie, okay, you caught me on that one. It's not really about assessments just for the sake of it, Lily. It's about building and developing self-awareness. Now, some of us have self-awareness in droves, and some of us it also needs to be accurate self-assessment. So you might be aware, but it might not be accurate. So what assessments really do is help us be more aware of our behavior, because frankly, how we see ourselves and how somebody else sees us, the difference, the gap there is what we call a blind spot. And I really firmly believe we can't change or develop what we're not aware of. So assessments are, I think they're really helpful. The other part of an assessment that is a little bit less high tech sometimes, there are electronic forms, is the 360 interview, where if I'm working with you as a client, I go to your boss, your peers, the people that work for you, maybe your clients or customers, and ask them some basic questions about you to get a really 360 view of what you're doing well, what you could do differently, maybe some areas that you want to develop, so that gap or the blind spots aren't blind anymore. Sometimes it might be hard feedback to get, but it's really important because, again, we can't change what we're not aware of.
So a good comment has come in on the chat that the difference between a leader and a manager, right? Because you could be a CEO and still be operating as a manager. So what would be the differentiating factor? What would separate them to have them be a leader, which is what you concentrate on?
Well, I think a really good leader inspires people to get the best from them, as opposed to a manager. I'm not saying managers only do this, but managing to me indicates more I'm telling you to do this, I'm controlling you, as opposed to and that's a little bit simplistic, but instead of inspiring you, developing you, coaching you to really do your best work. And that means understanding, the talents of the people on your team and making sure that they have the coaching, the training, the resources that they need, and that they're in the right job. Because if someone's in the wrong job for them, then all the coaching and the training is only going to be of so much value. So to me, the difference between a manager and a leader is someone who can really inspire and influence their team members in a very positive way.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I know that you're also a big advocate, and you use a system known as Core Clarity, which talks about strengths and talents. I just want you to touch upon that a little bit, because most of our viewers and those who may be watching on replay are going to be from completely different levels, right? There are going to be some entrepreneurs, there are going to be some employees, there are going to be some CEOs, some managers. There's going to be all levels. But what is the importance of understanding what our strengths and our talents when we are in the workplace or even running our businesses?
Mm-hmm. Well, really, understanding our talents and then developing those talents into strengths, it applies to everyone, whether they're working for themselves, they're working for someone else, or they're an avid entrepreneur like you, Lily. Because again, this is core clarity is a methodology that is based and is based on the Gallup-Clifton strengths that used to be called Strength Finders. They renamed it, which is an assessment that identifies your top 5 talents. And the theory is that if we all know our top talents and then we spend more of our time working in those talents, using those talents, leveraging them and developing them into strengths, then that's what will make us be more successful, rather than, I think our culture to a certain extent has instilled in us this need to focus on our weaknesses and try and get those weaknesses to be, and I'm not saying you don't have to work on your weaknesses, because none of us, especially we entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, we have so many things we have to do, but spending as much time as we can using the talents that are natural to us, the ones that we really didn't do anything to get them, but we can take those talents and build them, use them, take classes, learn, get experience to build those natural talents into strengths.
And the other part of that too is that if you know that you have these stronger talents and you can identify your gaps, so to speak, to seek out other people that can fill and make your whatever you're offering, your running of your business, much more efficient, much more pleasant, just to make it a much better, well-rounded scenario, if you will. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because if you work for a large company, chances are you may have lots of people around you to do all the things that you don't like to do or aren't any good at. When you work for yourself or you work for a small company, you have to wear many hats. So we're not saying ignore all the things that you don't like to do and you're no good at. We can't afford to do that, unfortunately. But building a team, a tribe, a crew, whatever you want to call them around you, so that you can get them to help you, to bolster the things that you're not good at. Sometimes we have to just get better at some of those things. But if we're spending all of our time in things that drain us, we're just exhausted and we're not using our talents, I think, optimally and leveraging them the way we can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So these last 8 months, we have experienced such a significant shift. Have you noticed in your coaching that even the type of clients or the type of scenarios have changed, or have they remained the same? Is there anything that you can share with us regarding that?
Well, I think a lot of things are the same in that, again, a lot of the people that I work with haven't spent as much time developing their leadership skills and their communication skills. I think that becomes even more accentuated when we're all sitting here at home on a camera communicating for the first time in this way. So it's even more important that, I'll give you an example. I had a client recently who was leading a meeting with his team at the beginning of COVID, and he had never done that before. And he didn't check in with anyone to see how they were doing, or even, in fact, mention the stay at home or the virus. And, people need that connection. We're getting used to it now, but even now, our emotional self is part of who we are. It's not this separate thing that we just use for our hobbies or our family. It's part of the whole package of us. So we have to, especially if that doesn't come naturally to you, you have to make it part of your leadership toolkit, so that you are checking in with those people for whom that is really important, and who may be right now struggling with, a lower income, a sick family member, loss of your spouse's job, or anything. It could be a lot of different things that people are really struggling with right now emotionally.
So as a coach, you have many years of experience. This particular time frame, what kind of shifts or changes have you had to do in your coaching business in order to either continue to develop or continue to service existing clients? I know that you touched a little bit upon it, but I really want to drill that point, because there are going to be people who are no longer going to go back to a regular workplace. They may think about starting their own businesses, coaching, consulting. And so I think that you bring a very unique perspective as to sharing what you underwent, and that might be of value to those who are joining us live or watching the replay.
Well, like everybody else, I am at home. And I think I'm lucky in that some of my coaching anyway I was doing virtually. So this was a familiar world to me. However, I also do training and development workshops and speaking. And clearly those were not being done on Zoom or Teams. They were done live in person in a conference room or a theater space somewhere. So what I had to do was to, I think, first of all, get my head in the right place. So I really address a lot of what you talk about, Lily, which is mindset, and focus on, what can I control right now? So often I think our frustration comes from focusing on what we can't control. And, that's just an exercise in frustration. I'm not saying I don't do that, but really, I early on realized I had to focus on what I could control. But also, I've had to, migrate all the in-person training, workshop, speaking to Zoom. So I've had to invest in new equipment. I've had to do a very different kind of presentation than I would in person. If I'm in a room with 30 people, it's very different than being on camera with 30 people, especially when I'm not the biggest fan of technology, because I'm not particularly, adept at it all the time. So I think mindset is one, reframing, focusing on what you can control. And also, I think, learning new skills and new techniques, and, what sort of training, what sort of equipment, what resources, what can I do? What can I focus on? Is there a market that I haven't been addressing that now needs me? Or that, is in line? Obviously, I'm not going to go and be an astronaut, or I'm not going to be an ER nurse, but what can I do that might lend itself to my skill set? And I'm not a great fan of the word pivot, but that's really what it is, pivoting.
That's some great advice. We've gotten a question in the chat. What is the best test for entrepreneurs to take?
Test? Do you mean?
Okay, let's reframe that. Assessment.
I really think it depends on what one size doesn't fit all. So what is it that you're trying to understand, and what do you already know about yourself? As I said, one of my favorites is the Gallup-Clifton Strengths, and then building on top of that the core clarity methodology. But I also work extensively with emotional intelligence. So if it's really a blind spot you have around behavior, interpersonal behavior, that might be a good assessment to take. Or there are a number of different personality and 360 assessments. Mm-hmm. So, my number one talent in the Gallup core clarity world is individualization. So I never approach everything from a cookie cutter point of view. It's always what's most appropriate, what's most suitable for you, and what are you trying to accomplish? So, start with the end in mind and work back, said like a true strategic, right, Lily?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's my number one trait.
Yeah.
My thing is always trying to find the solution. Mm-hmm. And you've touched on it, right? There are going to be certain scenarios and situations that I just can't change. I can't control. They're out of my hands, literally. Mm-hmm. However, I find myself still trying to strategize that. So what's the type of suggestion would you give to someone where that trait may be so strong and so ingrained that then, it becomes frustrating to the individual?
Well, I mean, this may sound like a shameless plug, but it's not necessarily a plug for me. It's find someone to bounce ideas off, because sometimes, especially if you have that strategic talent as your number one or your number two, like me, Lily, mm-hmm. we sometimes see the end in mind, but we haven't really thought it through. We may not have gone through all the different scenarios. So finding someone, even if it's not a coach, a mentor, a trusted advisor, someone to help you, maybe help challenge your assumptions, mm-hmm. about what you're thinking, maybe just encourage you to look at all the possible options that are available to you, look at what it's going to take for all of those options, and then, make decisions based on that. But, we need people on our teams with all sorts of talents. So as strong as your strategic talent might be, you may need some other talents there to help you figure out what's the best next step, what's the best maneuver, what's the best new entrepreneurial venture.
Mm-hmm. Or the person who has the better communication skills, where they can take those strategies and communicate them better than I can, right? Because it doesn't, just because I'm the entrepreneur and it starts with me, does not necessarily mean that I may be the best qualified to get me from point A to point B, to your point. I want to go back just a little bit and touch upon the emotional intelligence part of it. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was coming up through the ranks in corporate, you may have experienced this as well, is that there was very little emotional intelligence. Now it seems to be sort of the buzzword, but let's put it in perspective, even from an employee, office worker, mechanic, a banker, whatever our levels are, how important is it for us to develop emotional intelligence?
Completely and utterly important, whether you're a leader, a manager, a CEO, or an individual contributor. I mean, I haven't done a lot of research myself, but there's so much research out there now for the last 30 years since that term emotional intelligence became almost commonplace. Mm-hmm. And all of the research shows that there's a very strong correlation between high emotional intelligence and high performers, regardless if they're individual contributors, and especially with leaders, strong leaders. So emotional intelligence is not one thing like IQ. If you've been tested, you get a number. Emotional intelligence is made up of very, very many facets, including self-awareness, and the ability to influence a team, the ability to lead a team, empathy. There's all sorts of different components. So you might have 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 aspects of emotional intelligence that are really strong. But some other things, like, for example, I worked a lot, as I know you did, in entertainment, where sometimes emotional self-control is not exactly glaringly obvious. So you can be great at so many things, and one area of emotional intelligence may not be there. The great news is we can learn better emotional intelligence. We can develop it. So that's great news, I think, as opposed to personality and IQ, which are, most people would posit those things are more or less fixed.
Right. That's great advice. So, in closing, what would you say to the viewers, either live or on replay, where they could see themselves in the future by using some of these tools that you've shared about improving our talents? What would be your words of wisdom to those of us who are here this afternoon?
Well, obviously, my first thing, and it's very inexpensive, is to go to Gallup Strength Finders Center, and take the initial assessment. It's $19.99 to get your top 5 talents. And if you've taken it before, don't take it again. The first set is usually more accurate. And then you can also get all 34 there are 34 talents that Gallup identified. You can get the whole list of those. But really where we focus is the top 5. Gallup gives so many resources that you can read about those talents. Obviously I use it as part of my coaching, and I use the core clarity as well, not only with individuals, but with teams. But you can do a lot of this on your own if you're curious and if you want to develop them. But starting with the awareness is probably my first and strongest advice to anyone.
Excellent. So if somebody is from the industry that you've indicated and they were interested in working with you, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can go on my website, turtleexecutivecoaching.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and they can give me a call at 626-791-8091. I am based in Pasadena, but I have clients in London and Australia and all parts in between. So I'm pretty easy to find, Irené Turtle. It's a rather unusual name. And I didn't make it up, Lily.
I know for the longest time I kept trying to say, it's like Irene. No, it's Irené. It's like it may be spelled that way, but the accent completely changes it. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a shameless promotion that you have some absolutely fabulous articles that you've posted on LinkedIn. So, and I know that there's maybe talks of a podcast or, something. See, I'm pushing you on the ledge a little bit.
Yeah, I have done a couple. I've been a guest on a couple of podcasts, and I loved it. Communication is one of my top 5 talents, Lily, if you can imagine that. So I love, I love talking about the stuff that's important to me. And to me, one of the most important things you can do is help a leader or anyone develop their skills so they can have a really big impact on other people. And if you're a leader, that impact can be huge and very wide ranging. So that's what gets me excited and passionate about what I do.
Well, on the chat, there's some great, Joe on Periscope is saying, this is amazing. He loves coaching. And so, kudos. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Irené, for taking the time. You've shared some really great nuggets for us to keep in mind. It doesn't matter if we're an employee, an employer, an entrepreneur. This information is very valuable because, number one, we interact with other human beings, right? So it's information that we can use at any time. And so again, if you are interested in working with Irené, again, let's put up her website, turtleexecutivecoaching.com. And so again, thank you so much for sharing this time with us and giving us this really, really valuable information.
Well, thank you, Lily, for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and the time has flown by.
I know, it just flew by. So before we leave, I want to give thanks to Tracy Allen. She's been the producer behind the scenes, and she is with Digital Marketing Supply. So I just want to give a little shout out to her as well. And so tune into our next interview. I am Lilyvette Rodriguez with Align by Design, and thank you so much for joining us live, or if it's on the replay, let me know that you watched it on the replay. Thanks again, and until the next one.